Hello, my name is Sheldon Xie, and a good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone joining us from around the world. I'm the research fellow at the Center for Globalization Hong Kong, CGHK, and it's my privilege to welcome you all today at CGHK's Inside Dialogue on the third anniversary of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. At the CGHK, we pride ourselves of being an independent Hong Kong-based think tank committed to foster a high-level dialogues on critical global issues. Our mission is to bridge academia, policy, and private sectors by providing a platform for robust exchanges of ideas and insights. As we gather here today, 3 years to Russian-Ukraine conflict, and the war remains that defining factor in global geopolitics. The recent developments have brought us new dimension to the crisis, with the United States and Russia engaging in a direct negotiation amidst ending the conflict. However, the exclusion of Ukraine and the European allies from this discussion has raised serious concerns. So therefore, we have seen this involving interaction and implication among the Russian, China, and the United States, also which raise critical questions about the strategic realignment in the multipolar world. So we're honored to have this exceptional panel of experts with us today to help us unpack these pressing issues. First, we have Professor Feng Zhongping, the director of the Institute of European Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Science, and brings invaluable expertise on European affairs and Sino-Russian relations. Second, we have Dr. Antonina Łuszkiewicz-Mendes, assistant professor at Jagiellonian University at Krakow, Poland. I know Antonina since 2022 in the Midwest Conference for Asian Affairs, since I was in a graduate school. Her inclusive background and footprints across the United States, Europe, and Asia will offer a unique perspective on these critical issues and their interactions with the broader geopolitical trends. Last but not least, moderating our discussion is Dr. Peter Chiu, chairman and founder of the CGHK, whose extensive experience in global strategies and media ensure this thought-provoking dialogue today. So I would encourage all the participants to engage actively and share your questions via the chat box. Let me stop here and let me hand the floor to the Dr. Chiu to guide us through this fascinating discussion on these critical issues. Peter, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Feng. Thank you, Antonia, and thank you, every participant in the conference room. Yeah, today marked just one day after the third anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. But a lot of things have happened, are happening, and might be happening again in the near future. So let me just point out a few phenomena. Russia and the US are talking, but I don't know whether you agree with me or not. I wouldn't put it as a US-Russia talk. I would rather say it's a US-Russia deal. What kind of deal is turned out to be, we don't know. But at least if you try to observe what yesterday happened in New York in the United Nations, there are two resolutions. One resolution from the UN Assembly, which strongly condemned the so-called aggression of Russia to Ukraine 3 years ago. While on the other side, the United Nations Security Council also published one resolution which not only didn't condemn, but also expressed the neutral position towards, this war, this invasion or aggression, whatever we call it, and say it's a conflict. It's a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, United States and Russia, and even China, and said yes, had put yes veto to it. And also yesterday, the French President Macron was in Washington meeting, Trump. Obviously, there have been a lot of disagreement between France and United States in terms of Zelensky. He is sitting in a huge dilemma. People have been talking around that he might be going to Washington to sign a mini deal with Washington in terms of the rare earths or the mineral agreement and whatever. So whether, the peace is going to be in sight within this week or within the next weeks, we don't know. We all hope. But what kind of peace is going to turn out to be? Who is the winner? Who is the loser? Right? Obviously, now Russia is turned out to be a winner, while the Ukraine is turning out to be the biggest loser. If I might be wrong, you can correct me. But I would say in the next few hours, in the next almost 50, 55 minutes, let's try to focus on two issues. First of all, let's try to stimulate what kind of scenarios are going to be for the so-called peace deal or peace scenarios. And secondly, since Russia and the United States and the Trump administration approach to each other in such a quick and radical way, which everybody expected, but which we didn't expect it, is that people have been talking around, maybe the hidden agenda behind this is going to be, to some extent, counterbalance China, which we really don't hope. Because yesterday, just on the day of the third anniversary, and Putin was talking with President Xi. According to the Chinese media, obviously China has said officially China was talking with Putin on the invitation of the Russian president. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. And all this, let me put all these issues on the table and let's try to be a surgery. Everyone's doctor, and try to make an observation and try to, make the surgery operation and try to look what's going wrong and what kind of scenario is going to be and what kind of hidden agenda is behind that. Okay, I will ask both Professor Feng and Dr. Antonia maybe represent your own remarks for about 3, 4, 5 minutes. It's up to you. I will say lady first, Antonia.
Thank you much. Thank you so much, sir. First of all, I would really, really like to thank all of you for having me. It's really great honor to me to be participate in this meeting in such a distinguished company. So thank you so much again, and I'm very happy that I can share a European perspective in our discussion, and particularly Eastern European perspective, because as Sheldon mentioned at the very beginning, well, we are pretty much a frontline country. I mean, Poland is not like directly involved. Our soldiers are not there in Ukraine, but actually we are, the very on the very border of both EU and NATO. So all these matters are crucial to the security in Central and Eastern Europe, and particularly to the country where I'm located and in a country which I am from. So, and another remark, because Mr. Cho mentioned that Macron met with Trump, and he was described in the worldwide media as the first European leader to meet with President Trump after all these developments. However, actually, just before Trump met with Macron, there was a Polish president in the United States. He was not invited to the White House because there was not enough time. But President Duda went to the US. He met with Donald Trump for just 10 minutes. So a lot of critical media in Poland, especially those not that much in favor of President Duda, were mocking him that, he took such a long flight just to meet with President Trump only for 10 minutes. So some were actually joking that brewing a good tea takes longer time than that. On the other hand, you might say that, well, everybody who has direct access to Trump is very valuable these days because it's very difficult to actually, have this access to President Trump and other leaders, in his closest neighborhood, let's say. So every attempt to meet Donald Trump face to face is very valuable and should not be criticized. That was at least the explanation of those who were more in favor of what President Duda did. So basically, there is a big turmoil and chaos across Europe right now, I would say, because in addition to those developments in US-Russia relations, which are earth-shaking, from our European perspective, we also have a lot of developments in particular European countries. We should also mention that we just had elections in Germany, which can also change the political scene of this country. And Germany is, of course, one of the most important players in Europe. Even though right now we see that Europe is kind of on the margin. At least that's what Donald Trump is trying to do, right? So we have this impression that Europe was totally put aside in all these discussions about the future of Ukraine, not to mention Ukraine itself, right? Because we have an impression that Ukraine itself was excluded from those talks about its own future, but the whole of Europe as well. So right now it seems it's like a US-Russian deal happening above our heads, above our meaning European heads. And maybe the third important player that will, join this game at some point will be China. So we have an interesting situation. We are going back to this old, power game. 3 countries or 3 powers or 3 kingdoms, I would say, perhaps, to make this kind of historical reference. Europe is not there. And this is pretty scary because from the European perspective, it looks like a kind of deja vu of Yalta Conference that took place in 1945, during which the 3 leaders, the leaders of the United States, UK, and Soviet Union, also talked and decided the future of Europe. And I'm talking about deja vu also from the Polish perspective, because during the conference in Yalta, those 3 leaders decided to shift the borders of Poland. So if you look at the map or, imagine the map at that time, Poland was much more shifted toward the east. And on the basis of this conference, eastern territories were cut off from Poland. They became a part of Soviet Union. And as a part of compensation, Poland was given some Western territories, which used to belong to Germany. So these things happened without any input from Polish people or any other, Europeans for that matter, apart from the UK representative, but not from the continental Europe, you know what I mean. So this is history repeating itself. There are certain things decided about Europe without Europe's input.
Yeah, so Ukraine was excluded. Europe, maybe Professor Zong, whether you agree with me or not, China was to some extent also excluded from this so-called peace process. Don't you agree?
As for now, right, China is not there, of course. Perhaps China might get involved in the future, but if we look like at the geopolitical landscape, because you also mentioned that maybe we will have this new alliance, a kind of reverse Nixon step, right, or Nixon phenomenon. So now we will have a kind of US-Russian, let's say, partnership maybe against China. But since I'm already mentioning that, in my view, this would not really work out this way, because there are very deep differences between what was happening in the 1970s and right now. Let us remember, Soviet Union and China had already had really bad relations before Nixon came up with his shift, right? We had this Sino-Soviet split in the early 1960s. So it was perhaps easier to build upon those really, really low relations between Soviet Union and China at that time. Right now, we have a very different situation. Relations between Russia and China are very cordial, even though some can say that it's a kind of marriage of convenience. There is no real authentic love between those 2 nations, but very, very practical, reasonable approach. On the other hand, you might say Russia is dependent on China. So China is like a lifeline to Russia these days and Putin's regime. And this is actually what allows Putin to move on, to go on. Yet we have to remember about those crucial differences between 1970s and 2025.
Yes. And yesterday there was a news conference in Kiev, where the President Zelensky attended. He was asked a question by the reporter of Phoenix TV, asking him about what kind of role does he hope for China to play in the time after the war. And President Zelensky said, of course, he welcomed China to play, to some extent, a constructive role in Ukraine after the war in the reconstruction process. So obviously, it's a warm signal for China. But we can understand such in the way that he was answering the question in a polite way, in a symbolic way, and who knows whether he will be still the Ukraine president after the war. Because he already expressed his wish to resign, for peace and for Ukraine to join the NATO. And on the other side, this afternoon, I read on the website of Moscow saying that President Putin also received an interview from the Russian TV channel yesterday, where he totally, fully rejected European to send troops to Ukraine after the war. So obviously, Zelensky is more or less a symbolic figure, and President Putin and President Trump, they are trying to play a dominant role where, as you pointed out, Antonia, both Europe and China, at least until now, have been excluded. So, Professor Feng, what's your take? What kind of scenario can you imagine for the peace negotiation, for the peace talk, for Ukraine? And whether, behind this so-called US-Russia deal, as I mentioned before, as a lot of people have expressed their concern, they're really a sort of hidden agenda. Nobody will try to admit it. Nobody will acknowledge it. If you ask American guy, Russian guy, neither of them will say yes. But we're still concerned about whether is there a conspiracy theory or the agenda of trying to, draw Russia out of the context with China and try to some extent counterbalance with China, or at least try to put Russia in a more or less a neutral position. Yeah, because we know the obvious original purpose of Russia to make the war against Ukraine was because Russia had been largely depressed by European or by the Western countries, because the original purpose of Russia more than 25 years ago was try to join the Western camp, simply because Russia was rejected by Western camp. Therefore, Russian people, they were so angry, they were upset. Yeah, they have no choice, try to make the war. So if I were American, I will set up a strategy agenda saying, okay, I will make the Russian people to be very happy and try to put them out of the contact with China. If Russia will try to, at least to some extent, in the neutral position, they don't have to be against China. They will just try to be more or less in a neutral position. Then that will be a big deal for America. I may be thinking too much, too long. I might have too much conspiracy theory in my head. You might correct me, Professor Feng.
Peter, thank you for bringing me to this conference and to meet all colleagues to discuss this such an important subject topic. I agree, this is a crucial moment. We need to share our thoughts, try to think hard about what's going on among these big powers, and about particularly about the war, which has lasted for 3 years already.
Exactly.
But I have to tell our audience, tell you, Peter, and situation is far from clear. We try to want to have a clear thinking, but the situation is still not clear at all. What the crucial question you raised about this evening's topic is about Russia's motivation. What is Russia's really thinking? But let me go to this topic question. Let me put highlight 2 or 3 of my thoughts first. I think to end this conflict, this war, is in everybody's interest. I think both Russia and Ukraine, the whole world actually wants to see the end of the war as quick as possible. That's my first point. Second, I think we should encourage, we should support every country's efforts, including America, new U.S. administration's efforts to bring an end to the war to end. I think we should encourage. But my third point is, if you want to have a lasting peace, if you really want to build up a sustainable security architecture, it's not not just Donald Trump maybe take this too simple. I think he wants to have a quick solution but he has definitely hugely underestimated, the complex, the whole heart of the solution can be. You need to really make the two involving parties, which is Ukraine and Russia, to come to the negotiation table, and you cannot exclude Ukraine. I agree. American help support is crucial. Superpowers support for this diplomatic movement is crucial. I think everybody agree with that. But this is a conflict between Ukraine and Moscow. Can you really thinking to bring these two parties to end, to end the war without one party's involvement? This is unbelievable. Because
maybe Americans they can talk with Russia with Ukraine, but not with Ukraine under Zelensky. Because they want to change the regime. Saying, okay, you have to go through the legal election. Say you have a new president of Ukraine, and he or she has to be pro-Russia. Then we can talk with him.
Whoever in power in Ukraine need to say a just solution. So I think Washington D.C. must have an absolute idea about this. Otherwise, any deals can make between Moscow and Washington D.C. But think about Ukraine said no. We have to take this into consideration. And the possibility for Ukraine to say no is bigger because behind Ukraine, this is the whole Europe, Poland. Antonina talked about Poland. It's not just Poland. It's the whole Europe. It's not just Eastern Europe. Yeah. The whole Europe, including UK, which left the European Union. They have a very strong, mind about this war and about the peaceful solution. My own idea is maybe all sides should think about how to have a ceasefire first, because as I have mentioned, we need to do something to have a ceasefire first, and then we take long time to be patient. This is the whole meaning about the diplomatic negotiation. Negotiation is lasting. We need to take months, years time to do the negotiation job. But let's do ceasefire first. This ceasefire, I think US, Russia, Europe can make a quick deal, including Ukraine. But negotiation will take a long time. So this is my first remarks. Peter, Russia's motivation is everybody's guess. But let me tell you my own thinking. I think why Russia was to please Washington D.C. and to have a distance with Beijing. Tell me the reason. There's no reason for Russia. This is not a rational movement, if you think, for Moscow to make such a move. I think the clever movement making by Russia is I want to normalize my relations with the United States, with Europe if possible, but it's more hard to do this with Europe, with Poland, for example. But to normalize its relations with the United States and meanwhile keep a close relations with Beijing. This is the best. Putin put Moscow into a best situation. Why they should try to get close to Washington D.C., which is a big question mark, I think. Yes. And then they try to keep distance with Beijing. That does not serve Russia's interest at all.
I agree. Yes. So I don't see any reason why Moscow should go away from Beijing right now and try to approach the United States.
And one more point, Peter. To please Russia, the West, United States need to make a very difficult decision to say NATO's expansion, NATO's offer to Ukraine's the membership will not be happen. I think I think this is difficult to for the European countries to accept this. They may think this is probably it's not a feasible decision, but they will never publicly say this. I think you can ask Antonina. I think Poland will never. Poland is a member of the NATO, and Poland will never publicly say this.
Yeah. So, but you mentioned normalization of relationship between Russia and the United States. So, which reminds me, which actually goes back to 2009, where United States has already raised the point, hey, Russian guys, we can try to normalize our relationship, which was broken, in 2008 during the war between Russia and Georgia, 15, 16 years ago. But after 2009, we know, the relationship between Washington D.C., Washington and Moscow was still going down until 2014, until the Crimea was taken away from Russia. Which actually the pre-step of the war between Russia and Ukraine in 2022. But now actually United States and Russia, they have picked up the historical old issue, 16 years, try to normalize their relationship. Of course, obviously, see, okay, nothing substantial is going to happen. Anyway, we are generous enough, to see how two big nations like the United States and Russia, their normalized relationship is fine. But things might be not so easy. If they would have normalized the relationship, they would have done over the course of lasting 16 years. Why now, 3 years after the war, after the radical war, nothing have been settled down, but now all of a sudden, these two big nations under Trump, all of a sudden they are talking about, hey, let's try to normalize our relationship. So what does it mean for a European country like Poland? What do you guys, Antonia, see the so-called normalization between Russia and the United States? China might be still too far away. And what do you guys, how do you guys observe the so-called normalization process between Russia and the United States from Polish point of view?
It's a very complex question, I would say. Well, of course, in Poland's interests, as well as in interest of other Eastern European countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, name it, is to keep Russian troops as far away from our borders as possible. So this is a very security-related foundation, So, of course, whatever happens, and probably we have to understand and we have to accept the fact that there will be no just solution. What do I mean by just? Just solution would be to give back to Ukraine all the territories which were taken away from it in an illegal way, in a form of war aggression, right? So we are talking not just about the eastern territories, but also Crimea. Let us not forget it was a part of independent country called Ukraine at that time, and it was taken away through a war aggression, right? So in that sense, you might say that would be a just solution from European perspective. But of course, we have to kind of acknowledge that this probably will not happen. So what Professor Huang was already mentioning, this is not just about, temporary, quickly signed solution, but about long-term plan, which probably will take time, right? Because it's not just about understanding that, okay, Ukraine will lose 20% of its territory, which is now occupied by Russia. This is something we probably have to be ready for. But the real question is what will happen in the next 3, 5, 8, 10 years? Because as you also mentioned, Mr. Cho, we have to go back to 2014. We have to go back to 2008, what happened in Georgia. And we can see that Russia has really mastered the same modus operandi. Put the foot inside the doorstep, freeze the conflict, and make it impossible for those countries to join either NATO or European Union, because none of these organizations would accept a new member if the borders are not settled and safe. right? So this is exactly the same thing for Ukraine and exactly the same thing for Georgia. So this is Russia's modus operandi over the last 20 years, let's say. So of course, this kind of rapprochement between Russia and the US is very worrying for Warsaw, because we used to treat this transatlantic alliance as the very basis of our security. So if Poland sees that its arch enemy, historical enemy, and true enemy under Putin's regime, I'm not trying to be Russophobic. I mean, truly, Putin, with his mindset and his ambitions, he is a security threat to countries like Poland from our national perspective. So if we can see this arch enemy getting close to somebody who we believe to be our closest ally, our main defender, then we do have a problem, and this whole idea of our security plan is just shaken, if not completely shattered.
The whole world picture for everyone is changing, is shaken. Obviously for European people, United States has been always a long-lasting friends, close allies, but all of a sudden it's not, right? So,
Peter, can I just ask one question with to Antonina?
Sure.
For me, I have been following the European issues observe European issues for many years. I have been always puzzled about U.S. European relations with Russia. I have been always thinking about why NATO should keep on expanding. What's the point for NATO to accept Ukraine? Because Ukraine is you can say Ukraine is a sovereignty state, but Ukraine is a very unique state. Unique meaning its relations with Russia. So why should we make Ukraine become a bridge between Europe and Russia, between Ukraine, Russia and the West, including United States, rather than opening the door to Ukraine for joining the NATO. NATO, my understanding, is a military organization. You can say NATO is a lot of European people tell me this is a defense military institution, but it is a military institution, and from thinking about if you are Russia, they think this is a threat, which come to their doorstep. And you mentioned that Russia is a threat to Poland, and if you are in Moscow, and NATO keep on, this military organization keep on going on, and coming into Russia's doorstep, what's the feeling of Moscow? I think any lasting solutions in the future between about Ukraine has to be solved, with this kind of thinking, which means Europe need to work out some ways to peacefully coexist with your neighbor. By the way, it is also our neighbor. It's Europe's biggest neighbor. It is our China's biggest neighbor. So we have to be clever to work, to live with your neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Professor Fang, for asking me this question. Again, I think it's a very complex case, and I do agree with you that the answer depends on the perspective we take, right? So, of course, yes, from a very rational point of view, we can see why Putin's regime is so afraid of the so-called NATO expansion, or I would rather say the democratization ambitions of Ukrainian people, because maybe in a more idealistic manner, we would say that according to the UN spirit and all these things, we accept that every nation has the freedom to choose its own political system, economic system, and its own future. I know it's very idealistic, but well, if we abandon all our values and ideals, then there will be only...
Oh, Pabla, the internet doesn't work. Hello, Antonia? Internet doesn't work. Maybe there's a problem of Wi-Fi.
an idea, right, to divide Russia from the rest of Europe, from European Union and NATO predominantly. But let us remember, I mean, this is a kind of Polish historical experience or our cultural DNA, if you will. From our perspective, Russia never stops and Russia can never be pleased. So what I mean is that the keeping Ukraine as a buffer would not work, because then we can see Russia, there will be a temptation for Russia to make a step forward and turn it from a buffer zone into a satellite of Russia, as it used to happen before. And what is next? The next is the so-called Suwałki corridor, which is a stripe of land. Russia already had some claims before. It wanted to build an extraterritorial road, which would connect Belarus with Kaliningrad. So that involves Polish and Lithuanian territory. And this is Warsaw's biggest, problem. What would come next? So this is why, from the Warsaw's perspective, we cannot risk keeping Ukraine as a buffer zone. It would be more secure for us if Ukraine is on our side, part of NATO and part of EU, because as I said, that keeps Putin's troops as far away from Polish borders as possible. So that's probably the reason why Warsaw and other capitals, particularly in Eastern Europe, with some exemptions, because now we have a very different situation in Slovakia, we have a very different situation in Hungary, but most of the Eastern Europe wants to keep Russia as far away as possible.
Let me tell you my real thoughts about this. I have been working on the European integration since the end of the Second World War. I'm very familiar about the whole European history in the past 80 years, because this year marks the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. It is also the 80th anniversary of the European integration. It's a process of making new Europe after the First World War and the Second World War. And in 1945, what is France and the rest of Europe's biggest enemy threat is not Soviet Union. It is Germany. Peter, you studied in Germany, and the whole. It was a biggest challenge for France and others to figure out how to live with Germany. Kissinger used to say the problem for Germany is too big in Europe. Maybe in the world is too small, but in Europe it's too big. All neighbors in Europe are small countries. Germany is significantly bigger than others. So everybody is to figure out how to deal with this, elephant.
Yeah.
And the whole story of the 80 years since the end of the Second World War is about how to work, how to let me put it this way, how to make Germany constructive power, and to make Germany become Germany's Germany, Europeans' Germany, instead of making Europe become Germany's Europe. That is the whole, European, especially particularly the Western European history in the past 80 years. Today, we have to learn some lessons, maybe experience in terms of its relations with Russia. You can contain Russia by keeping NATO, but you can also thinking something else. To have a NATO exclude Russia, including everybody, I think it has shown to be not a good idea for Europe. What is the new framework? What is the new way of thinking? It's a big question, and the whole Europe should think about this. I'm not have a clear resolution, a solution, but I think we should be inspired by post 1945 European way in dealing with Germany. To have a single market, to even have a single currency after the the collapse of the Berlin Wall. The launch of the single currency euro is a political movement. It is because Russia, because Western Germany, Eastern Germany is going to become a united country, and the West Europe decided they must reduce single currency as quick as possible in order to contain, if you like, Germany, united Germany. Peter.
Yeah, Germany was a good example after the end of the Second War, but only after the end of a war, of a world war, Germany has all of a sudden become a good example of a good nation. Let's go back to Russia. Having said that, Russia had experienced all the sufferings, all the containment strategies from Western camp after the end of the Cold War. I was in Germany 30 years ago. Every day when we're watching the television, in every television program, there was a EU enlargement, there was a NATO enlargement. As Professor Wong pointed out, the NATO all of a sudden goes to the closed door of Russia, which obviously build a big strategic threat for Russia. On this side, we do understand the so-called strategic concern on the side of Russia. But actually, as Antonia pointed out before, I do see some very deep-sitting distrust between Western European countries on one side and Russia on the other side. People in Western Europe just don't trust. They deeply distrust Russia. I have to say, apart from the intergovernmental mechanism between China and Russia, if you ask the average normal Chinese citizen, I have to say, I don't have the percentage. I have to say a large amount of Chinese average citizen, they also distrust Russia, because of the history. There are quite a number of examples in the history that Russia have reached a deal with China, and all of a sudden by tomorrow, they betray you. I really don't hope such kind of historical example won't repeat it again and again between China and Russia. But this very deep-sitting distrust, at least from Chinese people's side towards Russia, is still there. Which might some people to raise concern. There might be some, hidden agenda between the deal between Russia for the deal between Russia and the United States. If as I say before, normalization is nothing wrong between Washington and Moscow. But how about if the relationship between Moscow and Washington has been normalized, which actually would have been settled over the course of last 16 years, but it wasn't. But now, all of a sudden, why now? That's a big question. But even if the relationship between Moscow and Washington will be normalized in the very rare way, in a very weird way, I have to say. So what will be the next steps? What will be the next step, as Antonia pointed out before? There could be still some more deals between Moscow and Washington. If we still say, okay, this deal won't hurt China, won't hurt Poland, won't hurt Germany and France, then what will be the over next deal? Because I have to say the chemistry between Donald Trump on one side and Vladimir Putin on the other side, to some extent, is similar. There's some similar chemistry between these two big leaders. I might be wrong. You can correct me. So this is a long-lasting concern. I really hope that my concern won't be realized.
I think Antonina mentioned a very important fact at the very beginning. She said, today's situation is not the same with the situation in early 1970s. When Kissinger came to Beijing, that time, China's relations with Soviet Union was in a crisis period, in a state of crisis. Now, China-Russia's relations is in a very healthy, robust state. So I couldn't say a sudden, a change of Moscow's approach as far as China is concerned, and I couldn't say China will have a U-turn about its relations with Russia. Mm-hmm. So talking about to have a pivot towards Asia, towards United States to counterbalance China, it's not a logic thinking. This is my argument. Again, I think to normalize Russia's relations with West, it's a long way because they have a huge gap in terms of their world view, world order, perception of world order. We have to be clear about this. So we don't need to worry too much about that. Today's worry or concern, I think, should be focused on how to avoid, how to take this opportunity, the opportunity offered by Donald Trump's returning to the power. We should wisely use this opportunity to bring a ceasefire first, and then, if possible, to bring interesting parties into the negotiation table to work out for a lasting peace. That is my thinking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, Antonia.
If I may jump in, because we can see that in this discussion, we are mainly talking about international relations. But on the other hand, we have to remember that certain gestures or things that Trump is doing and saying maybe are actually targeting domestic American audience. This is very often the case, especially in countries where we have elections every 4 or 5 years and where the leadership always has to, in everything they are doing, they have to think about how their domestic audience, their voters will react and whether they will be, re-elected after those 4 or 5 years. Well, this might not be the case for Donald Trump at this moment because it's already his second term, but who knows? He might change the law. He might introduce some state of emergency in the next 2 years to prevent from the next, midterm elections. We don't know. What we do know is that he's following that kind of strategy, move fast and break things. So there is a lot of spontaneity. There is a lot of transactional thinking. But in the first place, perhaps Trump is just trying to address his own voters back in the United States. And perhaps he doesn't care about the future of Ukraine. Perhaps what he wants, first and foremost, is to show to his own voters, hey, I made a promise. This is the promise made, I brought the peace to Ukraine. Joe Biden couldn't make it, and so on and so forth. Maybe what he needs is that kind of domestic success to strengthen his position. However, what we can also see, and that may also impact on those dynamics in US-Russia relations, US-China relations, we can see cracks in the US government. So we can see an unfolding crisis, tensions between Elon Musk and various political appointees, who are heading various agencies or departments. Most of them are just, acting heads. They are not even, confirmed by the Congress yet or anything. They are just in acting positions. So you can see how dynamic it all is. So this is another element to it. And it is also important to look at those internal dynamics because they might actually have a decisive impact on the outcome. Maybe not US-Russia talks, but actually what happens first within the US government. And that is another big question mark.
Okay, I may ask the participant in the chat room also to prepare some questions for our panelists. Yeah, I agree with Professor. Ceasefire is the most important thing, but obviously there are some different positions between United States and Donald Trump on one side, and then China on the other side, because to have ceasefire in first place is that's the neutral and original purpose, original position of China. But it looks like that United States and Donald Trump, they want to have the ceasefire under some preconditions, right? And first of all, they have to talk with Russia, and then sign the mineral agreement with Ukraine, and only after such kind of preconditions will be settled down, then there might be some ceasefire. So my last question will be, or my next question will be, what could be done now from China's point of view, from European point of view? Both European countries and China, obviously, we have been, as I said before, until this moment, have been excluded from the peace process. What could be done from our side to reach the ceasefire, to make that the ceasefire will happen, and to make sure that peace will be long-lasting, and of course, to some extent, try to make sure that our interest, both European interest and Chinese interest, at least won't be hurt too much in this context. So let me put it this way. So
what is the Europeans thinking?
Okay.
What is Europeans thinking? Well, it seems that what Ukraine wants most is not just the deal, but security guarantees, right? So this is what the whole thing is about, right? So they are willing to, sign this mineral deal. Maybe they are even willing to give away part of its territory. But the most important thing from Ukraine's perspective is securing the future, so that in 5 years or 3 years from now, Putin will not come back using some sort of excuse and actually move the border toward the west or take over the whole of Ukraine. But I must say I'm a little bit skeptical here, because in fact, Ukraine already has security guarantees, which are just not executed. So let us remember, when the Soviet Union fell apart, Ukraine gave away the nuclear weapons, right, which were stored on its territory, in exchange for security guarantees from the United States and the UK. So actually, if you think about it, Ukraine's future and Ukraine's security should already be guaranteed basing on those existing agreements. But well, you might be a little bit sarcastic, but paper takes everything, and everything can be written down on paper. So the downside of the harsh political reality is that sometimes those rules written and signed on the paper may simply not be followed. So that's probably the biggest challenge that the whole of Ukraine has, and the rest of Europe as well.
Okay.
From China's point of view, in a country which is far from Europe, from Ukraine, I think any kind of arrangement which makes Europe secure and make Ukraine secure has to be involved with the United States to be realistic. So I think Macron's French president's trip to United States, and the next trip will be made by the UK Prime Minister. I think they have one same purpose. They want to involve United States as much as possible. They would say this is going to be a nightmare if United States completely abandoned Europe. So I think Europe need to work out the future of Ukraine, and it is on security with the United States, but maybe not. I think NATO is a sole solution. With big powers, United States should be there. Otherwise, Europeans will not feel secure at all. But I think to have NATO is another story. NATO has shown to Russia it's NATO has not bring peace following the end of the Cold War to Europe. So to think about this, as far as China is concerned, I think China wants to be a provider for negotiations, and also to help to rebuild Ukraine following the war.
So if I may also add a very quick thing, because Professor Fung said that NATO failed to bring peace to Europe after Cold War. Am I right? I'm not misunderstanding your words. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But actually, from, again, perspective of countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Romania, it did. Because without NATO and without this insurance policy, let's say, in terms of security, Poland would not be, and other countries would not be able to develop in peacefully, and the feeling
Antonina,
of security.
can I ask you one quick question? If you think NATO can provide security guarantee for Poland, for others, why do you worry about Russia's next move after Ukraine?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, this is the only, insurance policy that we have. And what you're saying, the erosion of NATO, this is a big threat. So this is the realistic part, right? NATO did bring peace to Eastern Europe, like the European countries. But of course, if we have this erosion of this process, we might have in 2 years Russian troops on the border with Poland, and maybe even, eroding Poland and entering Polish territory. So I think it just depends on the perspective of the country that we take, right? It's very different from China's perspective, Washington, and very different from Warsaw's perspective as well.
Any meaningful negotiation about European security, about the future of Ukraine, needs to take into the consideration of everybody. Russia's, Europe's, and then we can hopefully to see a lasting peace. Thank you.
So Professor Fung mentioned one word before. Europe needs to work out some security mechanism. So my question to Antonia, both to Antonia and Professor Fung, is what do you think, or to what extent can Europe develop a sort of joint security and joint diplomacy without the United States, or to some extent without the United States, because it has been, everlasting since decades. People have been talking around joint security, joint diplomacy, but always along the United States, joint troops, right? German Franco troops, which was in talk, at the end of 1980s, in the middle of 1990s, and until recently by French President Macron. But finally now under Donald Trump administration, it has been critical. It turned out to be critical. Whether, European countries needs to defend itself and also try to defend Ukraine, sooner or later, more or less, you guys need to work out a joint security mechanism. France might be alone. France might be isolated, right? Because the French President Macron will be in office still for 2 more years. But now we have new Germany under Friedrich Merz, right? Since 2 days, even if the German coalition has not yet been built out. But Friedrich Merz has been so strong. He said Germany needs to diplomatically be independent from the United States, and he already rejected to build a coalition along with the AfD, right? So it looks like that Franco-German coalition will be strong again. Okay.
Let me first to say my points, and then let's ask our European colleague to correct. I'm very pessimistic about this, but the history tells us only crisis, particularly crisis from outside, can make Europeans to make a movement.
Exactly.
What is the current crisis now facing Europe? It is not a war between Ukraine or Russia, because they have NATO, so Europeans can still sleep. Now the crisis comes from Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants to leave the European alone. They want to, you keep your own, security. That is a crisis which haven't say for Europeans in the past 8 decades.
Exactly.
80 years they have relied on the United States, but this is all of a sudden, Washington D.C. has changed their mind.
Right.
How this crisis is big enough to move Europeans? I think they will do. They will definitely do something. But the question is, can they do this without money? And now the money becomes the most difficult question for Europeans. To have our own security is very expensive. And even the Franco Germany wants to do something. Where do they get the money? Peter, that is my observation.
I read a European think tank report a few days ago saying they had made an estimate saying, okay, how much money do we need to build a self-defensive European troops? Saying annually, European Union only need 250 billion euro to build a European own security troops, which is actually, they said, okay, if all the member states will be joined together, they can afford, because there's a still a small amount of GDP for each country. But of course, the precondition is that all the 27 member states need to join together, not only France and Germany. If Italy say no, if Austria say no, if Holland say no, for example, then I don't think France and Germany can do together, can afford these 215 billion euro.
Where are they going to buy the weapons? If they buy weapons from United States, that means still cannot get independent. If they do this by themselves, it will take many, many years to do this, because the Europeans have not remarkable military industry at all nowadays. Let's listen, Antonia.
Antonia, right.
Well, no, I agree with both of you that, there is not much optimism when it comes to that, but it would be a kind of historical paradox if EU turned into a military platform, because as Professor Fung mentioned earlier, it all started as an economic platform. So economy is what brought these nations together. Then EU turned into a political and ideological platform, because these days we talk not just about, having the same currency or, one joint market with a free flow of people. It's also about the same values and ideals, right? That's what is supposed to bind all Europeans together. However, next step might be to turn EU into a military platform. And that it would be interesting whom we should blame, actually. Should we blame Russia for that? Because we wouldn't have this discussion if Russia did not attack Ukraine. Should we blame the United States for that? Because they abandoned us, in the most, dark moment. So that would be just a kind of sarcastic laughter of history, let's say. But whether it is possible or not, actually, if you look at the numbers, EU has given a much bigger aid to Ukraine than the United States. So when we talk about this mineral deal, it seems that Donald Trump wants to have incomparably bigger, amount of assets and those mineral resources than what US actually put into helping Ukraine. So it's like twice or thrice, bigger number than what actually US contributed. And US contribution mainly contributed or helped American military industry, because this money mainly did not go to Ukraine directly, but it supported military production of military equipment in the United States, which was then sent to Ukraine. So you can see that, this is actually like a closed circle, let's say. So what about Europe? We have this huge amount of money frozen in the form of frozen Russian assets. So this is how Europe, believes it is funding Ukraine. But as you all said, we have 27 voices without EU. And in such situations, it is truly a challenge. It's much easier when you have one Washington, D.C., or you have one Beijing, or you have one Moscow. We have 27 voices. And if we allow Berlin and Paris to lead this coalition, there will be an imbalance. On the other hand, you don't have time and space to discuss with everybody all the details, because then we will just get stuck in this administrative process and no results will come out. So this is a very, very difficult, complex thing to get this agreement and discussion within this big, big family. And on the top of that, we do have what we call Trojan horses. So we have Hungary with Viktor Orban, who is openly pro-Russian. We have Slovakia now with President Fico, who is also openly pro-Russian. So even within this European family, we have many voices.
Right. European Union is indeed is highly diversified organization. There was an anecdote about France. The former French President de Gaulle, he used to say, "Oh my goodness, how can I govern a country like France who has more than 200 sort of cheese?" Right? Because France has already, more than 200 sort of cheese. Now we say, as Antonio said, European Union has 27 voices, but not only 27 voices, maybe they have 54 voices. They have two voices among, within one country. So my question is, do you think, Antonia and Professor Feng, will European Union be still sustainable? Or will the European Union be dissolved or go apart? Go apart in the near or in the far future, because for our generation, European Union is a big achievement. That's the highest level of human wisdom to settle the conflict. But as I was seeing, during the era of Cold War. But now is a few years after the end of the Cold War, right? The United States has changed a lot. The United States, all of a sudden, under Donald Trump, has become a totally different United States. And the European Union, there are at least more than 27 voices, to reach one consensus is basically a mission impossible. So European Union, will it be dissolved or will it be go apart or will it be still be sustained in this way for another some more years?
The enemy will inside the European Union itself. And the enemy is, I used to think about its populism movement, parties. But now I changed my mind. I think even the populist movement, the politicians in populist camps, they think it's a law to dissolve, to bring European Union, into pieces, because that doesn't serve serves nobody's interest. And if they insist on this, like a Brexit, they will lose the support. They will not get enough vote. So even these people do not think to break down the European Union is a bad idea. I couldn't imagine in this world who will destroy European Union. I think European Union is now in people's mind because this European Union brings the peace, if not prosperity, at least the peace for European countries. They will live for that.
I personally think that what can be a threat to European Union is not a war in Ukraine, it's not the rise of China, it's not even, the problem or challenge right now with Donald Trump's policy. I think that the biggest threat comes from within. So what Professor Feng mentions, those populist movements, because according to them, the biggest threat to Europe is immigration. And particularly, sometimes they don't want to say it explicitly, sometimes they do. It is the presence of immigrants who are Muslims. So according to those populist movements, look at Poland, you look at Germany, look at France, they all focus on this kind of cultural/religious threat, let's say, to the fundaments of Europe. Of course, in each and every country, this has a little bit different flavor and a different context, but basically it boils down to a belief that we can blame everything on immigrants. We can, blame them for everything. All the problems stem from immigrants who do not associate, who do not blend into the rest of the European societies. So I believe that to the European stability and integration, this is a real threat, the presence and growing strength of such populist movements, not outside threats, I would say.
Okay, how about China and the European Union under this very special critical circumstances in a very special critical context? So obviously, a lot of people have been talking about, so since now there's a huge problem between European Union and the United States. There's a critical time, there's a suitable time for China and the European Union to go towards altogether.
Peter,
Tactical, whatever.
Peter, I had a talk with some European colleagues the other days. I said Europe is become a very lonely king, emperor
Yes.
in this
Yes.
world. Why so lonely? Because they lose the UK. Of course, this is not a European decision. This is a British people's decision. They lose Russia. This is again, it's not European decision. It's because of Moscow, has this conflict with Ukraine. So, and now they are losing United States because Donald Trump's, policies. And I asked them, are you going to lose China by de-risking, all kind of this ideas, so don't, please, I saw this, the softening of rhetoric made by the European leaders, particularly European Commission leaders in Brussels. I saw this clear change of, this gesture. They are facing, I think they are worried about becoming isolated, and so they want to, strengthen cooperations with Beijing. I think this should be welcomed.
And perhaps we could mention one country that we haven't mentioned so far, who might be, in the end of the day, perhaps the biggest winner of all of that is India, which stays aside, keeping officially the neutral position, or as Indian government likes to call it, the strategic ambiguity, having problems with China, ongoing problems that probably will not be solved over the next few years, but at the same time having good relationship with Russia, having increasingly good relationship with the United States, and perhaps some more windows opening up for closer cooperation with Europe, which, as you said, is kind of feeling lonely right now on the international arena. So in all this multipolar game, India, I guess, out of all these countries, has now the biggest maneuverability. But of course, it will depend on the capacity of the New Delhi to develop this kind of relationship with all these, let's say, blocs or partners.
Yeah, India is interesting. But let's go back to China. Professor Feng, do you think, you proposed that European Union or the European countries shouldn't lose China again? So in this sense, strategically or tactically, Europe should go with China or, towards to each other. I agree. But in terms of the value system, I have to say over the course of last decades, between European Union on one side and China on the other side, they are going apart more and more, right? So if obviously in order to go even tactically towards China, European Union should get rid of their political value, I have to say, political value dilemma, whether they should put a political value or the ideological disagreement over the head, above their tactical approach towards China, or should they, abandon or even not abandon, try to absorb this political value dilemma along with the tactical movement with China. I mean, this is which requires huge strategic wisdom, both from China and from European Union. But obviously now both China and the European Union need together. Yeah.
Peter, in 2019, European Commission made this famous perception on China, or partner, competitor, and a systemic rival. Following that, we saw Europeans' approach towards China becomes strengthening competition and even rivalry, and reducing the cooperation. That is very bad. That is not serves our interest at all. Europe, I think, should become more practical. You are right. Because to become more practical, focusing on real issues like trade, economic cooperations, and global governance. I'm thinking about particularly this climate issues. To think about how to enhance multipolar world, multilateral institutions like United Nations facing Donald Trump's approach. So I think both Europe, China should focus on this real, practical issues to solving some issues facing by us, by the whole world, and then we build up this, trust. Come back to the trust issue, and then I should feel optimistic about the future of China-European relations.
Yeah, we're already running over time. So let me ask the last question and then ask both of you to make your final remarks. So obviously, it looks like that new world order is in shaping. Antonia mentioned before the IATA system. The IATA system is over now. Obviously, now between the United States on one side and the European Union on the other side, there's a huge problem, huge disagreement. And Russia has become the biggest winner. And there's a huge room or the huge desire for European Union and China to go towards together, right? So this four-angular architecture, United States, European Union, China, and Russia. So how will this new world order look like? Maybe it's still premature to say that by 2015, but definitely no later than 2030, no later than 5 years later. Now we really have to think ahead of time over the question how the new world order will be looking like.
Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that, now in academic research, we always have to apply theory. It can be constructivist theory, it can be neorealism. It seems that right now nothing fits into any of those categories or any of those theoretical approaches. So perhaps we would have to reconstruct our own thinking about the world. But if you allow me, because Professor Feng was mentioning, was talking about how Europe and China should work together toward the same kind of future or direction. So I believe that, again, maybe I'm too human nature oriented, because I believe that economy, those prospects, is not everything. Trust is the very basis. And I will give you a Polish-Chinese example from the very beginning of the 2022 war in Ukraine. So when Russia attacked Ukraine, there was a true hope among Polish elites, among Polish people, that who can stop Russia from continuing this aggression? The only country that could do that in the mindset or in the imaginary of Polish people was China, because China has this leverage to push the right buttons, on Kremlin and put some pressure on Russia to withdraw, to stop it. But these hopes were not realized. On the, something contrary happened. We see that this Russian-Chinese partnership is actually getting tighter and tighter, closer and closer. So this is actually the opposite thing of what Polish people were hoping for. So this is, I believe, one of the things in a discussion of the future of relations between EU and China. The question is how countries like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, and also Western countries have this trust in China if China is the one who officially was neutral, has been neutral in Russia's aggression toward Ukraine. But we know that this relationship is pretty close, and what China is doing allows, for example, by importing gas and oil, is maintaining Putin's governments. So this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have ahead of possible talks and possible tightening of relations between EU and China. It's not just about, what can be expected from Europe, from the perspective of Beijing, but also what Europe expects from Beijing. So as always, it's mutual.
Okay, Professor, what's your take in terms of the being formed world order?
Okay, I think this is a very good question. After long discussion about the Ukraine and big power relations, I think if we're thinking about the global new order, we have to think about, United Nations. And when you talk about US, China, Russia, European Union, I have been thinking about this is a Security Council, organization. Without big powers in, healthy interactions, we are not going to see any strong multilateral institutions. Without this, what is the hope for the world? What is the hope for a world order? So we need to really think about how to improve relations among these big powers, global powers, and then come to the United Nations institutions. And this is the only hope for the world in the future, Peter.
Okay. So thank you very much. That's a very interesting discussion, very constructive and very inspiring. Of course, without ending. So we just leave the discussion with an open ending. But since all the things are still happening, so we're still happening a lot of things in the near future. So let's take a close eyes on what's going to happen. And thank you very much. Now I ask Sheldon to come out and to round up.
Thank you, Dr. Fong. Thank you, Peter, for your whole moderation, and thank you, Antonia, your inspiring ideas from the perspective from Europe. I think we learn a lot, like especially the reconstruction of the whole international order, and also the key ideas that what kind of Europe were thinking about the possible ending of the Russian and Ukraine war. So thank you very much. I think it is really stunning discussion in the evening. So I also earn the thanks to all our colleagues who are listening and this whole dialogue and join us today. Your active participation in this crucial dialogue holds immense value as we navigating this pivotal moments in the Trump 2.0 area and foster the possible constructive policy under this more unpredictable time. So should you have any questions or concern or shared interest in collaboration among institutions or anything else, I encourage to explore our CGHK accounts and don't hesitate to reach out to me, the sheldonxie@cghk.com. So your input and engagement will be really important to us, and I will keep our updates on our events and also the dialogue sessions maybe in a month. So have a good day or have a good rest of the night for those who are in China, and maybe see you soon when we have another constructive discussion panel on other kind of issues.
Okay, thank you, Antonia in Poland. Thank you, Zhongping in Beijing.
Thank you.
All the best. All the best. Until next time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All the best to all of you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.